higher education, research, and culture in the 22 Arab countries. Our partner today, and in what we expect will be a series of online events, is the Arab Political Science Network, an initiative that seeks to support scholars' research and teaching, particularly, as its name implies, in political science and in the Arab region. We're here today for a discussion titled Research in Pandemic Times, to find out how researchers focused on the Middle East and North Africa, particularly those in the humanities and social sciences, are faring. Two quick but important logistical notes. First, we will have simultaneous translation to Arabic for registered Zoom participants. To access it, go to the bottom of your screen and click on Interpretation and then select Arabic. One important note that we just discovered before going live is that you need the latest version of Zoom to get the Arabic, so you may need to update your Zoom. Speaking of translation, let's all try to speak at a measured pace to help our viewers and our translator. The second logistical note I wanted to share is about how we will be engaging with you. After the speakers finish their presentation at some point during the discussion period, we will launch a very short poll in English and Arabic. Please answer it. For submitting questions to the speakers, however, use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screens. We're fortunate to have with us today Marwa Shalaby, an assistant professor of political science and gender and women's studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Gail Buttorff, an instructional assistant professor and co-director of the Survey Research Institute at the University of Houston's
في جامعة هيوستن للعلاقات العامة. مع نورمان آلم وهو الأستاذ المساعدة في السياسة في جامعة الذي عمل في متعلق في الوباء
by the COVID-19 pandemic. They published the results as they relate to the MENA region in Al-Fanar Media. We've put links for the English and Arabic versions of the commentary in the chat box for anyone interested. I will now turn to Marwa and Gail to start our conversation. Marwa will repeat the instructions for accessing simultaneous translation in Arabic, and then Gail will start the presentation. Welcome.
Thank you so much, David, for the introduction. It's great to be here today, and thanks for Al-Fanar and APSN for hosting us today. اللي يحب إنه هو يسمع الندوة بالعربية لو سمحتوا.
So if you want to hear the interpretation in Arabic, there are some buttons at the bottom of the screen. Just press the Arabic interpretation, and then you will be able to hear the Arabic interpretation. And thank you.
Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you to David and Ahmed and APSN and Al-Fanar for organizing this and for asking us to participate. We're really excited to be here to share our work we did with, as David mentioned, Nermeen Alam at Rutgers University. So I'm going to present our slides. And just to reduce the back and forth and any technological problems, I'm going to present and Marwa will interject when I inevitably forget important information. So, and I will try as best as I can. I normally talk fast, so I will try and talk at a measured pace for our great interpreter. Okay, so this, as you can see, this is a survey we conducted this past summer. The goal was to examine the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on research. And we were particularly interested in asking respondents about their research productivity, how that had been impacted since the outbreak of the pandemic, as well as the implementation of stay-at-home mandates, which also meant the closing of non-essential businesses in many places, which meant a lot of childcare facilities and schools were also closed. We also asked respondents about their service loads and online teaching and how that had changed since the outbreak of the pandemic, since the outbreak of COVID-19. Also changes to any department and university funding for research and travel. We've heard a lot in the news about the sort of dire fiscal straits that many universities are now in. And we also asked about childcare and homeschooling responsibilities since, of course, schools and universities were closed or had moved online. The survey was fielded online between May 26 and July 28. We distributed the survey in two main ways. One was through emailing a list of about 600 scholars that were affiliated with the Middle East Studies Association, working in the social sciences and humanities, as well as through social media. So for example, organizations like APSN and Al-Fanar tweeted our survey, as did Marwa and Nermeen through their own personal social networks. In addition to the online survey, we also conducted qualitative interviews with a number of regional and international scholars working in the areas of Middle East and North African research. So we had about 200 plus respondents, again, in the social sciences and humanities. We had respondents from 32 countries. 59% were women.
دولة 69% منهم كانوا مرأة وكان معنا كذلك 70% منهم مناصب ثابتة، مساعد، مشارك أو كامل أو ما يعادله. يعمل أكثر من 80% منهم في جامعات بحثية، إما عامة يعني 56% أو خاصة وهي 25%.
Are political scientists. So one of the main goals of the survey was to look at the impact on productivity, and particularly for research. And perhaps unsurprisingly, we found a big negative impact on research productivity. 67% overall in our survey reported a decreased number of hours devoted to research. And this was particularly acute for those with small children, those under the age of 18, as they now had to take on more childcare and homeschooling responsibilities than before March 2020. 60% also reported that their non-research and their service workload increased. And this we found was especially pronounced for female faculty, both those with and without children. Another 70% noted that the number of hours that they devoted to teaching had increased since their universities had moved online. So they were spending more hours on teaching than they had previously. As MENA scholars ourselves, we were also interested in the impact on research in the MENA, which is something we also explored in our survey. So in our survey, about 50% of the respondents reported working in or on the MENA. Scholars conducting MENA research, as we know, face many challenges to conducting fieldwork, even prior to the pandemic, but the difficulties have been compounded in recent years because of the surge of wars and conflicts. And one of sort of the first things that stood out to us was as a likely impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the inability to conduct fieldwork in person and to travel for research was the inability of scholars to now spend countless hours in the field building networks of trust, which is so essential for ensuring the safety and privacy of research subjects, as well as the ethical implementation of research design. In terms of the findings from the survey, from this figure, we can see that about over 90% of those working on the MENA had to postpone travel for research, and many have noted, and especially since we've sort of gone through the summer and now are well into the fall, it is unclear when many will be able to restart or resume these in-person and in the field data collection efforts. 54% of those that work on the MENA postponed applying for funding or funding for research that requires travel, and only about 31% of MENA scholars were able to actually conduct the work they needed to do remotely or online during the height of the pandemic this past summer. While the pandemic disrupted in the field data collection and research plans for this summer and fall, there have been a few positive impacts, in the sense that about 30% of our respondents from the MENA reported starting new COVID-19 related research projects, and 46% reported starting new research projects, whether not related to COVID-19. So in that sense, potentially researchers are getting creative about how they will modify their research agendas moving forward. And we'll probably see more. This has presented some opportunities to explore new research ideas, like how the pandemic has played out in the MENA region, regime responses, amongst other developments that we've seen over the summer and are seeing now in the fall. Of course, we expect long-term effects, especially for a field that relies so much on in-person and in the field data collection efforts. Field work is important to many MENA scholars' research agendas, and it is, again, unclear when this will be able to be resumed. Because of this postponement of travel and field work, many scholars that work on the MENA believe there will be an increased reliance on remote access and online data techniques moving forward. So about 88% of respondents reported this. And many, 76%, expect that there'll be fewer publications that rely on this, on these important firsthand materials and primary source materials moving forward. There is also some concern about funding, especially funding for non-COVID related studies. Of course, there has been a increase in funding for COVID related projects, both especially for health impacts on health in urban and other areas, but it's unclear whether this what will happen to funding for non-COVID related research moving forward. And also some of our respondents pointed out that this effect, especially on funding, is particularly acute for scholars in the region, who even before the pandemic were already facing sort of insufficient and inadequate funds for research and travel at universities in the MENA. So we're going to wrap up here and turn it back to David for questions from the audience, as well as from David himself. We had a few open-ended questions on the survey, and we received a lot of thoughtful and insightful responses to these questions, and so we've included a small sample on the slide, which you can access either on the Google Drive or through the chat, and you can, we'll leave these up, but you can download the PowerPoint and look for yourself. So we'll end it there and pass it back to David.
Okay, thanks very much. That was a good summary. I guess I would just love to hear the two of you explore in just a little bit more depth about why researchers focused on MENA are having a particularly hard time, what's different for them, essentially.
Thank you, David. So just before I answer your question, I just want to reiterate or can highlight what Gail mentioned in the presentation, is the fact that us as MENA scholars, we were already facing many challenges conducting research in the region even before the pandemic. So as we all know, and lots of researchers attending with us today, they already know that it has been challenging due to the prevalence of authoritarian politics, repressive measures, absence of the rule of law, and this deep mistrust in foreign researchers and entities, security surveillance, and regimes' arbitrary exercise of power. So there's so many things that we had to maneuver when we were doing research, even before the pandemic. And even local scholars were facing so many challenges relating to the topics that they would choose to study, and also challenges relating to funding and restrictions on travel and acquiring foreign funding for the research. After the uprisings, as we all know, we were all very hopeful, and there was like this brief era of openness, and most of us were hoping to get more work done in the region, but very shortly we were confronted with a worsening situation due to increased violence, civil wars, increased state scrutiny and intimidation, which culminated, of course, as we all know, in the murder of Giulini in Egypt in 2016 and the detention of many academics across the region. So the setting was very, very complex, and it was very, very complicated for us to do work. I remember that when I was doing my dissertation work, which was based on public opinion data, just even me thinking about acquiring a fresh first-hand data from a Middle East country was just impossible. So we were already functioning in a very complex situation, and we had, as foreign scholars, and even myself being an Arab working from the US, we had really to build very strong networks of trust, and we had to spend countless hours in the field building these trust networks and ensuring also the safety of our subjects and our own safety, of course, but most importantly, our research subjects, because this is no point that we do our research and we get the data that we want and then we just leave them there and they face whatever fate they may face. So there's also this, like my research on parliaments that I was been doing for the last 6-7 years. I had to spend like days and weeks and like months in the field in these parliaments, talking to parliamentarians, even to administrative staff, and trying to convince them that I'm not dangerous and I was just gonna get the data and write my book. So there's so much work that you do in the field for you in order to get the information, to get to do your work. So going back to your question about the pandemic, so what we see and what we found in the survey, that the pandemic has just added an additional layer of complexity to doing work in the region. It was already with the freezing of the research funding and the travel funds from our institutions, and this over-reliance in remote methods of data collection, we are not able anymore to ensure the safety of our participants, our research participants and subjects, with the increased state surveillance of all the digital world and this digital espionage and the control of the other communication mediums. We cannot ensure the ethical implementation of our designs anymore, and we saw this in our survey, where respondents were saying, we can't do it, even if it's logistically feasible. We just can't do it. There's so many security and ethical issues that are related to our project that we are worried about. So, and more research that coming from not just
وقفنا بعض الشيء ليس فقط في هذا السياق، حتى بعض الوباء. هذه السلطات هي تحاول أن تخنق الشعب أكثر.
Further deepening of autocratic practices under the pretext of controlling the spread of the pandemic. The last thing that I also want to bring up is the issues of accessibility and how this digital modes of communications and the online data collection. And so there's an accessibility issue that's related to this as well, that not all not especially when it comes to disadvantaged or vulnerable populations. They not all have access to these different modes of communication, and now we're excluding a big chunk of our subjects from our research just because of accessibility issues.
That's interesting. One thing I wanted to do was to encourage some questions from the floor. Oh, I see we do have some. So let's maybe turn to some of those.
So David, if I could just add one thing as well,
sure,
to what Marwa said is another thing that was a challenge even before COVID was accessing administrative data. So census, labor force participation, unemployment statistics, and so on. That's not consistently made available in all countries and at all time periods. And that can, that of course hinders the ability to go online and just download administrative data from countries to do alternative online research. Of course, some governments have become much better in providing that data and making it publicly available. But there are, of course, also some data quality issues with that as well, which is not something you would see working in Europe or even some other developing countries with that type of administrative data.
Of course. Okay, well, those are great issues that you explored. I wanted to turn to a couple of questions from the floor. One was, which I thought was a good question, did COVID-19 encourage foreign MENA researchers to collaborate with local researchers? Is there a, we've talked a little bit about potential silver linings. Is there a chance that there could be, that kind of increased collaboration might be one of them?
I can take this question. I think there is always a silver lining, but with the current situation, with our universities freezing our travel and research funds, it's very challenging to work with local scholars, right? And the other thing that I find a little bit unethical and I struggle a lot with is the fact that even if I have lots of collaborators in the Arab world, I enjoy working with collaborators in the Arab world, but I think that the issue that we're facing right now, that I don't think it's ethical for me to tell them to go do field work and do interviews and interact with, even if their governments is allowing this, and even also if there's some normality and some people are back to work and everything. But I also find it very challenging that I got lots of my co-authors asking me if they can go and resume the work. But as a scholar working here and that I know what it means, and especially with the situation in the US these days, that it's really hard to make this decision to ask your local partners to go do the work for you and do the field work for you. So yes, it is good that there's more local researchers and there's more communication with local researchers, and more we're relying on them to get information for our research. But at the same time, it's a very, very tricky situation that we have to be very, very careful so we don't violate our university's ethical codes and our own also ethical kind of principles of conducting research in the region. Okay,
that's good. And a methodological question that I was also curious about was about the geographical distribution of the respondents. I gather they were from a lot of countries, but can you tell us a little bit more about the geographical distribution?
Gail, I think you have the data. We ran the data for the geographical distribution, right? We have them. You're muted.
Yeah, 6 months in, I still forget to unmute. The most of the scholars were from the US or the UK, but we did have, as we mentioned in the presentation, about 32 countries covered. Within the MENA region, we had about 11 from Egypt, had a few from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Lebanon, Jordan, United Arab Emirates, Algeria. Following, the biggest chunk were from the United States, and then followed by the UK, Canada, Germany, and so on. But we did see at least a few respondents from most regions, with the exception of Asia.
Just to add to this, just to make sure that the results that we're presenting today are relating to those who work on the Middle East, either they are located in the Middle East or in Europe and the US. The data that we're presenting today focuses mainly on Middle East research. So on those who are doing Middle East research, just to elaborate.
Okay, that's useful. And a broad question, which said, have you evaluated the scope, importance, and regularity of feedback between research partners? I thought that was an interesting question. Gail or Marwa, either one of you want to talk about this issue of feedback among research partners?
So we did ask a few questions about the ability, a lot of us scholars, whether you're working on the MENA region or not, work with co-authors. And we did ask a few questions about the ability to continue to work with co-authors, in addition to, especially those with young children, how many hours are you able to devote to your collaborative work compared to before the outbreak of the pandemic. We also asked if their co-authors were able to work as usual, and whether or not there were any changes as a result of the pandemic and the stay-at-home mandates.
Okay.
There is a question in Arabic at the end of in the Q&A about the small number of respondents and how the sample is not can be there's problematic because it's a small number. I would like to comment on that, and we understand that this is not a representative sample, and it is a convenient sample for sure, where we communicated with our own networks, the Middle East associations, listserv. But it is not. We're not trying to make sweeping generalizations out of this research. What we're trying to find here are the obstacles and the challenges facing scholars in the pandemic. That's not the goal of the study, to produce sweeping generalizations where we can generalize to other regions or other places. We do realize that that all scholars studying most of the other regions are facing similar challenges. We're not saying that these are specific or unique to the MENA region. We understand that the margin is very small between region MENA versus others, but what we're trying to say is even this small margin will have a really big impact on a region that already is struggling with having solid research coming out of this region. And we all know, scholars of Middle East and North Africa, we know how the region is so behind compared to any other research-wise. I'm not saying behind, research-wise, how we're so behind compared to other regions. And there's so much work to be done. So what we're trying to say and what we're trying to establish in this research by saying that even these small margins will have really big impacts on MENA research, something that we will continue to see over the next few years, and us collectively should be aware of this and think about ways to remedy these challenges. So yeah, that's the question in Arabic, David, that you asked me to answer.
Okay, great, thanks very much. I'm just going to read out a comment since other people can't see what's in the Q&A other than us. There's a comment from John Waterbury, the former president of American University of Beirut and a political scientist. He was commenting on your comments, Marwa. He basically said, I began field research in the MENA in 1961 and continued for 4 more decades. There is no question in my mind that research conditions have deteriorated significantly due to failed states, civil war, and resurgent autocracy. It is very sad. Social science research is unfortunately very dangerous for the researcher, even without COVID. So I just wanted to read that out. On the more—
That's very accurate, very, very accurate observation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and over a sweeping period of time as well. Going back to the silver lining, we have another question on, can MENA help in creating a network of those researchers who work in COVID-19 so we can benefit from each other? So is there a chance of, again, of increasing collaboration?
It really depends what topics to study. It's becoming like it's keep on narrowing down now on the topics and the things that we can do in the region, and it really depends what topics that would be feasible to be done remotely without close state surveillance, without like raising any flags for regimes, or so it really depends. But this is a way to go, and I think
أو ممكن أن يشكل مراقبة إلى آخره. يعني جامعاتنا ومؤسساتنا
so some institutional responses to these issues. It's not just us trying to help each other to overcome this crisis. Like for instance, like here in the US, some that we started doing, university started to offer like 10-year extensions. People that I need more time for getting things published and getting work done and resuming field work. But not everyone will like not every university in the region. I haven't heard so far in any university in the region. Please correct me if I'm wrong, people from Middle East universities attending this webinar, if there are any kind of similar measures taken by these universities by providing additional funding, providing additional childcare support, providing more time for tenure. So I haven't heard about that in our institutions in the region. So this is also us have a role to play, being together and building strong networks, but also our universities, they have a role to play supporting us during these times.
Right. Another interesting question came in about donors, which I was also curious about. Those people who fund research, or donors who are researching collaboration. I mean, do you have any sense of, number one, how much flexibility is being offered in terms of extensions, and also, yeah, I guess just both that's a bit technical, but not just flexibility, but what's your sense of how funders and donors are responding, those few who do support social science research?
So I have an ongoing few ongoing grants with international donors, and one of them is the Carnegie Corporation, for instance, of New York. We have an ongoing grant going on, and based on the last few months, organizations have been very, very, very supportive. Like we always receive emails from them saying, if you're facing any difficulties, let us know. We understand the delays. Don't stress about it. It's not like there's nothing you can do about. Just send us a request for extensions. We will do them. Similar for other, I have a couple of grants from the region as well that I requested extensions and they were granted right away. So international donors are very, very, and local donors too, not just international. They're very, very understanding. They offer extensions. They're doing their best to maneuver the situation, how to navigate the situation. But again, I think also there's more flexibility and more understanding from these organizations. There always be a great thing, and I'm pretty sure there's more work to be done as well.
Gail, did you have anything to offer in terms of the donor scene? Did any survey respondents talk about that or not?
A few did, and supported what Marwa has just said, that, you know, that many have been understanding and you know, about the inability to travel, you know, especially if your grant required in the field data collection, that it's impossible, even if you could travel. You know, airports in many of the MENA countries were closed until relatively recently. You know, especially if you're coming from the US, you, as one of the sort of red countries in the three-tiered classification system that many countries are using, you know, you would need to quarantine for 2 weeks. And so that sort of, you know, I think many are understanding an inability to conduct the research that was originally planned for the grant.
Okay. I'd like to turn to the issue of gender, you know, for just a few minutes. I mean, one thing that really jumped out for me in the survey was this issue that clearly women with children were struggling a lot, and that's not a surprise. And we've heard quite a bit about that, but I'm not hearing about many solutions. And then there's a second part to that, which I'm going to try to sneak in from the floor, which is that the opportunities for women to conduct research in the MENA remain a challenge. You know, particularly, you know, you sometimes need male permission to do certain things, and sort of how could we support women researchers, particularly in the MENA? So twofold, I guess. What are the answers to the many women who are struggling with childcare issues? And is there a way to support female researchers more in MENA?
Yeah, I want to start by talking about the survey, and I can just build on what we found in the survey.
Sure. So we showed one graph that showed the number of hours devoted to research by those respondents who had children, and by gender as well. And from that figure, you can see, of course, women with children had reported the biggest, or sort of were the highest proportion, reporting a decrease in the number of hours, followed by males with kids, followed by females with no kids, and finally, the smallest proportion were male academics with no children. But we also saw this gender difference in the service workload, that it was women, both those with kids and without kids, female faculty, that reported, that were the largest reporters of having an increase in a service workload, you know, either because of advising or administrative meetings. And in the US in particular, this was compounded over the summer for female faculty of color as a result of the widespread protest against police brutality. And a number of universities reinitiated diversity and inclusion initiatives. So a lot of faculty did report on those. There was two things that increased the workload. It was the pandemic, but then also the issues of race and racial injustice in the United States.
So switching to the MENA region, and the question specifically about the gender and women in the region. So we all know that not just in the US and the West, it's that academia is a very gendered institution that is based on male authority and standards, male standards of success. So we all struggle with this, not just it's not a Middle East issue here in the US as well. Institutions, academic institutions, are just so gendered, and no matter how you try to say it nicely, they are very gendered. So males are the ones who are putting policies. They're the one who are promoted way. So they outnumber women. So women until now, after all these years, even in the US, we represent about 30% only of faculty. So even within this 30%, those who get promoted and get the full professor, it keeps them like going lower and lower and lower. So like you see like 10% full professors from 30. So there we have a leaky pipeline where women don't make it to full tenure. And as a result, there are less women in leadership position within these institutions. So the whole institutional culture and the whole institution structure is pretty gendered. So it is a challenge for women in the West, and it's compounded in the Middle East, given also the cultural and the stigma associated with women in leadership positions and also in higher positions in higher education. So this is a really a huge challenge. We have a piece that's going to come out hopefully soon on how these institutions are gendered and ways to remedy these gender structures. So as I just mentioned a little bit ago, like there must be strict institutional and very gender sensitive institutional measures that would remedy these issues. And again, and I really hope more and more here in the West and in the US, and so you see more awareness because women are pushing with female faculty, although there's smaller numbers, but they're pushing very hard for recognition and for more gender sensitive policies when it comes to childcare, child support, tenure extensions, and things like that. I really hope that in the Middle East as well would see this soon, that women would come together, and especially women in academia, and push harder for more egalitarian and more gender sensitive policies within their institutions that would allow them to excel and exceed on par of their male counterparts. And it's really sad because you walk into any higher education institution in the Middle East right now, and you see how females are outnumbering males in most of these universities and colleges. But at the same time, when you look at the composition of the leadership and the faculty and the leadership of these universities, you find very few women. So the disparity is so glaring, and I think we must just be very aware of these issues to be able to find the right remedies for them.
Gail, did you want to add anything to that or not?
Just, I think going back to the earlier question and the second part of this this question, I mean, I think there is an opportunity to be sincere in building partnerships and lasting partnerships, real partnerships with scholars in the region, so that we can amplify their voices. And and unfortunately, for political science and the MENA research, most of it is sort of what is important and what is not comes from a handful of prominent universities in the West. And it would be it's a real opportunity now for us to co-author. Of course, not what Marwa said is really important, not to ask people to go out in unsafe conditions and conduct our research for us, but to think about ways that we can build partnerships and collaborate with scholars in the region in a way that we haven't done to a great extent in the past.
Right, exactly. I mean, I was interested in that point before, if there wasn't ways to build genuine partnerships. I mean, I used to cover AIDS research, and they would talk about safari science, where people would swoop in and take people's data and come back out.
Maybe hire an RA, and then
exactly.
I think especially the gendered aspect, where this as even as a foreign woman, you face some constraints, but another as a researcher in the MENA, but in some cases you're exempt from some of the gendered norms that would inhibit research from scholars or from female scholars in the region, because you're an outsider.
Right. Yeah, I just wonder if there isn't some way to have maybe there already are, principles or structures or, recommendations for kind of building true, kind of more true partnerships.
Yeah, and collaborating and co-authoring and
Right, exactly.
And that's a way to amplify voices from the region is to
Exactly.
get published in some of the journals out of Western universities and presses.
Right. I've launched the poll. It's just a very easy, short poll that our viewers can go in and answer if they'd like to give us some feedback about their situation and also how helpful they're finding this presentation. I'm going to ask a slightly different version of a question that I see in the Q&A list. Of course, it's, as we've certainly learned over the past few months, it's incredibly impossible to try to predict the future. And we really don't know where this, pandemic is going and how long it's going to take to get a vaccine. But I mean, do you think that publications will be affected in the long term? I mean, once this is over, will there be a change in the style of research, or is it really gonna do long-term damage, particularly to research in the MENA? I mean, I realize I'm asking for speculation, but I think it's a question worthy of asking about, where is MENA research gonna be 2 or 3 years from now? I think it's interesting to think about.
I think that's a great question. Thank you, Mohammed Miliani, for asking this question about publications. So there are two parts for this question. So the first part is, let's talk again. I want to connect it to the gender component that we talked about a few minutes ago. So we found in our survey that the majority of our respondents, MENA scholars, non-MENA scholars, they all agreed that female scholars would be publishing much less than male scholar, their male counterparts, because of the pandemic, because of the family burdens, homeschooling. There's so many things associated with women that's why people were thinking that women will be just publishing much less than males. It's still too early, as David was mentioning, to kind of assess the magnitude of the issue, but already we're having evidence from journals and academic magazines, and so saying that we are already receiving so much less submissions from female scholars compared to the same period last year. So we're already seeing this pattern that females are submitting much less than they were used to submit, like just a year, same time, same period. So if you want to control for the semester, the teaching, whatever, there's just the same period of time. So we're seeing that, and our survey participants agreed that females will publish less. So the other part of this question as well is how the reliance, there's going to be so much reliance on remote data collection and kind of secondary data, and less reliance on primary data and the work that we all do, going to archives, interviewing people, especially if it's a topic that, for instance, I interview the opposition in parliaments, for instance, about what they think about the regime and electoral politics. It's very hard to do this kind of interviews online and getting them actually to say openly and honestly what they think, especially if their former regime opponent is not even in parliament right now. So there's this issue of the lack of primary data, there's over-reliance on secondary data or outdated sources, things that were done before. So we will see, and now publishing in academic journals, even for us here in the US and for scholars in the Middle East as well, it's becoming very, very competitive. And we were already having very hard time competing with other regions due to the fact that we don't have this much data. We don't know that much about the Middle East. So we were already competing with regions, with Latin America, with Europe, with the US, with already there been established research done for the last like 100 or more than 100 years, and we were already struggling to catch up. So if you want to publish in one of these general political science journals, it's really challenging. So now with this limited access to primary data, this will have for sure major impact on Middle East publications and the work that we can publish in leading journals where we can actually make a substantive difference in MENA scholarship.
Okay. Gail, did you have anything to add, or?
No, that was, yeah.
Okay.
She said everything. Yeah.
She did it all. Okay, great.
She did it all, yeah.
I just wanted to draw everybody's attention to a comment by Lisa Anderson, who's at Columbia, formerly president of AUC, that there's a new program at Columbia on research ethics in the Middle East and North Africa, with a website going live this week. So very extremely timely to what we were just talking about. And she gave there's an email address there for those of you who are interested.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so glad that we can be of service and share that. A question on certainly one of the most controversial topics in the region, basically saying that Israel is the toughest regime, constraining Palestinian and non-Palestinian scholars, even before the pandemic. Basically asking how is there a way international scientific bodies or scholars can, advocate, I guess, for a loosening of these constraints, or for a chance to give Palestinian scholars more freedom. I didn't want to avoid that question as hard as it is. Marwa, do you or Gail do you have a comment on that?
I don't think we have any. Sorry, Gail. I'm going to say a short comment, and then Gail, if you want to go ahead. I don't think we can, with the current administration and with the current president that's governing in the Middle East, in the US right now, it is really hard to raise these points and these concerns even within our institutions. It's really interesting that with all the academic freedoms that we have within our institutions, it's really challenging topic, and it's really hard to raise these issues or even push for real commitment for this kind of issues. So.
Yes, and just to add to that, I mean, we've seen some Department of Education suits against universities for, so there are issues of academic freedom in the United States as well. But I mean, one thing we talked previously before, and we mentioned in our article was, as much as we hate Zoom now, the online formats for conferences and workshops have the potential to increase participation from those that face enormous difficulties and cost in trying to travel to especially to North America and the United States, as a way to also amplify their voices when they can present work at the Middle East Studies Association this week online, especially from Palestine, from Iraq, Syria, areas where it's even tougher to be able to travel to some of these international conferences. So again, a very small silver lining, but even beyond conferences, as we've talked before, is being genuine about building partnerships, and that's also a way we can amplify scholars in Palestine and Israel as well that face difficulties in doing research.
Another silver lining that's related to the donors question that one of our participants asked, also it's a good thing, is that some funding organizations are shifting their funding now from research travel and so to conference registrations, and so there's so many now if organizations that used to fund research in the region are now giving this money to researchers to participate in online events and registration for like MESA or APSA or things like that. So I encourage scholars from the Middle East to look for these opportunities and actually apply for them and use them. It's applying for a registration for APSA or MESA or whatever, it's $100 and something. So it's a lot of money in the Middle East. This is really a lot of money. So I would really encourage our scholars in the region to look for these opportunities.
لكي ينظروا إلى هذه الفرص وأن يستخدموها.
Okay, thank you. And hopefully, maybe as we have more of these webinars, we can reach more scholars and use this as one conduit to get these opportunities out. We're winding down in time. I just wanted to give you the poll results. One question was, if you are a researcher, have you canceled or postponed indefinitely fieldwork plans for summer or fall? 66% said yes. Another question, fewer publications will rely on firsthand and or primary source material. 69% of our viewers agreed with that. No, yeah, 69% agreed, 22% were neutral, and 9% disagreed. So in general, people do think that we'll have less primary source material. And compared to before the outbreak of COVID-19, has the number of hours you devote to research, and then 31% said it's increased, 22% said it's stayed the same, 47% said it's decreased. And I'm happy to say that 97% of you agreed that you would be interested in more webinars like this one. So very happy to hear that. As one last quick question, in terms of conducting online research, somebody says, you know, is it a possibility to use Facebook friends for scientific research? Maybe we don't want the question quite that narrow, but what are some other kind of innovative ways to sort of reach people in, you know, in this kind of very online era in social science research?
So I think there's,
yeah, please.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, so within the context of the US, there's been growing amount of research that, you know, doing or conducting public opinion surveys on Facebook is feasible, and there's a few ways to do it. One is, of course, through your networks, right? You can post the link to a poll and sort of do the snowball sampling either through, you know, Facebook, but then also Twitter, and that scholars have used that in many cases. There's also another way, which is a bit more sort of trying to replicate a sampling procedure, which is done through what they call Facebook ads. And so this is definitely a possibility, and you know, you can select different demographic characteristics. I think one thing about the Facebook in particular is that it's going to vary, sort of the ability to get a representative sample is going to vary by country. So for example, I think in Jordan, which has a very high social media use, you know, 80%, some 80% of the population will use Facebook, whereas in Algeria, it can be as low as 45%. And as is the case with many online samples, whether in the United States or in the MENA, they do tend to skew a bit more urban and a bit more educated than the population as a whole. But yeah, it's definitely possible to do this, and there are different ways to go about sampling through Facebook and other social media channels.
Great, thank you, Gail. So we want to finish on the hour. Need to bring this to a close, but we really appreciate everybody's attention. I can see that a lot of our viewers hung in there till the end of the hour, so we appreciate that.
Thank you.
I thank Marwa and Gail for sharing their research with us. And the special thanks to the Arab Political Science Network for really bringing this discussion to us. And thanks very much to our translator. Again, this online event was just one in a series that we expect to have, so we hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you
so
all.
much. Thank you for coming. Thank you all for coming.
And for your great questions. We appreciate it.
Excellent questions.
Thank you. Bye.